discussion will talk about heterogeneity. So we'll discuss basic concepts of heterogeneity in a meta-analysis, and I'll make a second part of this video as well, in which we'll discuss the various worked examples, okay, of heterogeneity. So whatever heterogeneity statistic that I'll be telling you in this lecture, we'll discuss how to calculate them in those worked examples in the next video. So see, we have already discussed in some previous videos that one of the major goal of meta-analysis is to compute a summary effect, right? And we have seen how to compute that summary effect for fixed as well as random effect modeling, right? But another purpose of meta-analysis is to see if there is a pattern of effects. What does that mean? To see if there is really a variation in the true effect size. So we know that in random effect modeling, the assumption is that the true effect of the intervention itself varies across studies, right? That is the assumption in a random effect modeling, and the assumption is that the true effect of the intervention varies across the study in the form of a normal distribution, right? That is the most common assumption in a random effect modeling. So the purpose of heterogeneity, what is heterogeneity? Heterogeneity is this variation in the true effect size. Remember, heterogeneity is always with respect to true effect size, okay? Heterogeneity does not account for the random error which is responsible for variation in the effect size, but only the true variability in the effect size. So the idea of computing various statistics for heterogeneity is that we want to make sense of the pattern of these effects, okay? We want to see if really there is a variability in the true effect size, and if there is a variability, then how much variability is there, and what is the proportion of the how much of that variability, out of total variability, how much of the total variability is contributed by the true variability. If this does not make sense, it will make sense in some time, okay? So I'll give you an example. Let's say we have two interventions. For both the interventions, the summary effect is that it causes on an average 40% improvement, okay? It could be any intervention, maybe an intervention which reduces criminal behavior, so the summary effect is coming as 40%, right? But then we compute the range in the variability of the true effect size, and we see this 40% is just average, right? Then we see that one intervention, the effect is very consistent across studies, means it is 40% across all studies. But for other intervention, even if that average is 40%, that effect is varying from 10% to 70% across studies. Would these intervention mean the same thing to us? Obviously not, right? Because for first intervention, the effect is consistent across studies, right? It means that there is almost no heterogeneity, right? There is no variability in the true effect size, right? But for other intervention, the true effect size itself varies, so there is a lot of heterogeneity, right? So on an average it is working for 40%, but the range may be anywhere from 10% to 70%. So there is heterogeneity. So an intervention which has heterogeneity and intervention which does not have heterogeneity, they may mean different things to us, even if both of the intervention have the same common summary, the mean of the effect size is same, okay? So the point is that if the effect size is consistent across studies, then we need to know whether it is consistent or not, and to consider the implications of that. And if it varies across studies, like for second example, the true effect size is varying across studies, then we also need to know that if it is varying, and we need to consider the implications of that, okay? So we have already we will discuss in this chapter what are the different measures to quantify this heterogeneity, right? There are several questions we can ask, and there will be a different statistic for several of these questions, okay? So remember, the variance that we see, or the variation that we see in the effect size, this we have already discussed in basic concepts of fixed and random effect modeling, is that the observed variation is contributed both by random error as well as there is a true component of a real variation, like a true variation in the effect size, right? So first is spurious, which means like simply random error, which is due to sampling error, right? Because we cannot have an infinite amount of sample size for each study, so we'll definitely have some random error in that study. So that is just noise, right? But then there is a true variation also, right? And that true variation is the heterogeneity, that is what we want to catch, and we learn how to pick that up through various statistics in this lecture. Now we will learn how to isolate this true variation out of the observed variation, and we learn how to measure that using various measures. Like for example, we will see Q statistic, we'll see how to we do a test for heterogeneity also. So we'll see the concept of the p values. Then we'll see between study variance, t square, this we have already seen a little bit in random effect modeling. Then between study standard deviation represented by t, and then we have something called I square statistic. So these are the various questions we can ask when we are talking about heterogeneity. First question is a simple question: is there heterogeneity or not? What is heterogeneity? It means variation in true effect size. So is there variation in true effect size or not? Is there evidence of heterogeneity or not? For that we will need to see Q statistic, and we'll do a test for heterogeneity, and we'll calculate p value for that for with regard to this Q statistic. Then the second question is, we can ask, okay, let's say there is heterogeneity. This p value will only tell you if there is heterogeneity or not, but it cannot tell you how much heterogeneity is there. So second question you will ask obviously is how much heterogeneity is there, like what is the variance of true effects. Basically it is asking you what is the amount of heterogeneity, right? So this will be answered by t square. If the t square is more, it means there is more heterogeneity, and if it is less, it means there is less heterogeneity. Then what are the substantive implications of this heterogeneity? And this could be answered by something like t, we can compute a range of the how much variation is there in the true effect size. This will make sense later on. Last question is, what proportion of the observed dispersion is real? So the last question we can ask is, out of total variation, how much variation is contributed by heterogeneity? So this is a different question. Okay, so three questions: whether there is heterogeneity or not, how much heterogeneity is there, what proportion of the variation is contributed by heterogeneity. Different questions and different statistic for different questions. Okay, so this we have seen. If the effect is consistent, means there is no heterogeneity. Let's assume a hypothetical example, there is absolutely zero heterogeneity and effect size is consistent across studies, then that there is no heterogeneity. And if there is maybe another intervention which has some heterogeneity, there is a lot of heterogeneity, means that the average effect size is 40%, but it still ranges from 10 to 70%. Obviously these two interventions, which they will have different practical implications, right? So that is why we need to understand this concept of heterogeneity, and we need to explain how much heterogeneity is there to make sense of this heterogeneity in a manuscript. So we have talked that observed variation will have some part will be random error, which is sampling error, and then some part is true variation, like a real variation in the effect size, because of maybe there are different covariates which may affect the effect of an intervention, or age or dose. Some covariate is there which is affecting the true which is affecting the effect of the intervention across various studies. So there is a true variation component also, and this true variation component is what we talk about in heterogeneity. Okay, so we have already discussed these terms previously, but we'll come back to them again. You can see there is this thing called true effect size and observed effect size. What is true effect size? True effect size is the effect size of a study which we will never know. This is a hypothetical concept. It is the effect size of actually the underlying population, of the intervention in the underlying population, and we will only see this effect if the study had infinite sample size and there was no sampling error, right? So that is the true effect size. Then there is something called as observed effect size, and that is the effect size that is actually observed, right? So why is observed effect size not the same as true effect size? Because when we because of two reasons. First reason is that the sample size of each study cannot be infinity, and because the sample size of study cannot be infinity, there is always some random error introduced. Second reason is that we cannot have infinite amount of studies in our meta-analysis. We have a limited number of studies in our meta-analysis. So because of these two reasons, there are two types of variation in the observed effect. First is the random error, or the you can call it just noise. Okay, this is because the sample size is not infinity of each study, and because we don't have infinite number of studies, that is also another reason for variation. But then there is a true variation also, which is the actual variation in the effect size due to various covariates, right? So the variation that you see is basically random error plus true variation. Okay, so heterogeneity, what is heterogeneity? Heterogeneity means heterogeneity purely. When we talk about heterogeneity, we are talking about heterogeneity in true effects only. We are not talking about the noise, that is the random error. So the concept is that we need to quantify this heterogeneity by removing that noise from the signal, from the observed effect size that we are seeing, the observed variation, whatever variation, total variation is there, we need to remove the noise or the random error. Then what is remaining will be the heterogeneity. Okay, so heterogeneity is the variation in the true effect size. What is true effect size in population? When you have an infinite sample size and infinite number of studies, that is when you will see the true effect. But since you can't have that, what you will see is the observed effect, right? So you can look at this concept like this. So there will be some observed variation in your observed effect size. It will not be the same as the true effect size. This observed variation has two components. First is the true variation, which is the actual variation in the true effect because of various covariates. And then there is some random error or noise, which is what you also called within study error, and it is simply there because you don't have studies of infinite sample size. Your studies have a limited sample size, which causes a sampling error, which introduces this noise or the random error in your study. So the heterogeneity is this component, the true variation in the effect size, that is heterogeneity, right? And if you already remember, we have discussed this in fixed and random effect modeling. Heterogeneity is assumed to be almost zero in fixed effect model. Means that we assume that the true effects are consistent across all the studies, and whatever differences is there in the observed effect, it is purely due to the noise, it is purely due to the random error. But in random effect modeling, the heterogeneity is assumed to be non-zero. It means that we assume that in random effect modeling, the true effect of the variation is also varying from study to study. So whatever variation we see in a random effect modeling is contributed both by the variation in the true effect as well as noise. There is noise also, random error also, and there is a true variation also in random effect modeling, right? So in random effect modeling, we allow the true effect size to vary from study to study, and heterogeneity is non-zero. And in fixed effect modeling, the heterogeneity is assumed to be zeros. This is how you can understand the concept of heterogeneity. Okay, so now this is the basic concept of how you can isolate the heterogeneity out of the total observed variance. See, let's say you are seeing some amount of variation, right? First you compute how much variation you're actually observing, right? Total observed variation. Okay, now this, obviously you are expecting that this total observed variation will have in part, some of it will be true variation and some of it will be random error or noise, right? This is what you're expecting. Let's assume for a second that there is no true variation. Let's assume for a second that, just like we assume in fixed effect model, that the true effects are consistent, true effect is consistent across study. So for a second, just assume that the true variation is actually zero. Means whatever variation is there, whatever observed variation is there, it is purely and purely spurious. It is purely due to random error or random variation. So you are assuming now that the total observed variation is purely random. There is no true variation there. Okay. So now you are assuming that whatever observed variation is there, it is purely due to random error, and the true variation is actually zero. Now you will compute something called as expected random variation. So what does this mean? I want to ask this question: how much variation I expect by random error. This is expected random variation. So how much variation do I expect if there was random error? If random error was allowed to creep in, how much maximum random variation I would expect? So let's call it random variation expected, right? Now you know that you have assumed that whatever observed variation you are seeing, this is purely due to random error, right? So, and now you have also computed how much maximum variation you would have expected if there was only random error. Let's assume this is more, let's say this is more than this. So the observed variation is actually more than the expected random variation. So that excess, whatever excess observed variation is there, that part, that could be that could be called as heterogeneity. So then you can calculate your true variation or heterogeneity as the total observed variation minus the expected variation, expected random variation. So I hope this makes sense. Basically, you have to assume for once that whatever total variation you are seeing in your meta-analysis, this is purely random. The true variation is zero, just like what you like. It's, think of it like a fixed effect model. You are assuming a fixed effect model that the true variation is zero. Whatever variation you are seeing, this is a random variation, right? Then you calculate how much random variation you expect normally from this number of studies, from this meta-analysis. Let's say your observed variation is more than what you would have expected just by random error. Then whatever excess observed variation is there, that will be called as, that will amount to heterogeneity. Okay, so you can read this part if you want to understand the problem. Suppose for a moment that all studies, they share the same true effect size. So we'll assume for once that there is no heterogeneity and all the studies have the same effect size. So whatever variation is there, that is purely random, right? So under this assumption, you would not expect the observed effects to be identical to each other, because you would still expect some within study error, right? Now assume that the true effects, they do vary from study to study. That in that case you will expect heterogeneity also and within study error also, right? So because we want to calculate heterogeneity, we need to separate out this random error, right? We need to isolate this subtract this random error. We need to isolate this heterogeneity. So this is the method that I've already told you. We will compute the total amount of study to study variation which was actually observed. So we'll calculate what is the total variation that we are observing in our studies, right? Then we will estimate how much the observed effects would be expected to vary from each other if the true effects was actually same in all studies. So we'll assume that the true variation is zero. Whatever observed variation is there, it is purely contributed by random error, and then we'll calculate how much variation we expect by random error. So how much observed effect would be expected to vary if there was only random error, and whatever excess variation that we will see, total excess variation in addition to the expected random variation, that will be called as, that is nothing but heterogeneity. Okay, so this is the concept of the Q statistic basically, and we'll see how Q statistic is calculated now. So we'll first see what is Q statistic, then we'll try to make sense of why this is a good statistic. So what is Q statistic? Basically Q statistic, it represents the ratio of observed variation, total observed variation within within study variation. So this is the formula for Q statistic. It is the sum of weight and the product of difference between the effect size and the summary effect. So think of it like this. Let's say you have so many studies and each study has its own effect size. Then you have something called as of course, a summary effect. Let's put it here like this. Maybe this is the summary effect, right? So first we will calculate the difference between each of these effect size and the summary effect, right? So that will be your y minus m. Then you'll square these differences and then you will multiply this with the weight of that study. So for example, I'll calculate the difference between this y and this w, which is the effect size in the summary effect, and I'll multiply it with the weight of the study. Similarly I will do that for all the studies, and then I will compute a sum of that. So that is q. It is also called as weighted sum of squares, right? So w into effect size minus summary effect square. This is the sum of this. You know what is w, you know how to compute the weight of a study in a fixed effect modeling. It is simply the inverse of the variance within study variance, right? You can also put this like this. Instead of writing like w, you can write 1 by within study variance. And you know what is within study variance? Within study variance is nothing but within study standard error square, right? So I can put it like this also, standard error within study standard error square, and in the numerator will be the difference between the effect size and the summary effect. So one thing you will notice, this is very important, is this is a standardized statistic. It means that like if you can remember, we calculated like a standardized mean difference, right? That is a common effect size index used for meta-analysis. So in that, the difference in means is divided by the standard deviation within the group. So similarly, this q statistic, this is also a standardized statistic, because the effect size, the difference in the effect size is been divided by the within study standard deviation. So another way to write is study effect minus summary effect square divided by within study variance. Okay, so this is nothing but, now you can see this numerator is nothing but the observed variation, right? Whatever total variation that we are seeing, observed dispersion, right? This is the dispersion that we are actually seeing, which is nothing but how much the individual study effects, they are deviating from the summary effect. So this numerator is nothing but the observed variation, and the denominator is within study variance. So the denominator is whatever variance is contributed by random error, right? So this is your q statistic. Okay, so now I want you to look at these 4 studies and see how q statistic will change conceptually from one study to another study. So these 2 studies, A and B, all the effect size that you see, they are same in both the studies. The only difference is, in A study there is a wider confidence interval, and in B the confidence intervals are narrow, but the effect sizes themselves are same. So you would expect that the summary effect will also be same for both the studies. So I'll draw a summary effect here. You can see the summary effects will be same for both the studies, right? So now you can see, if we calculate the q statistic, which is nothing but y minus w whole square summation divided by variance, within study variance, right? So you can see this is the formula for q statistic, right? So now you will see something, is that of course the difference between effect size and weight to square, that is this is the nothing but the observed variation. The observed variation will be same, right? The observed variation is same in both these cases. The numerator will be same, because the difference between the effect sizes and the summary effect square, it will be same across all the studies, because the effect size are practically unchanged from A to B. But what is varying is the within study variance. You can see that the within study variance is much more in A as compared to B, right? You can see that the confidence intervals are very wide, means not enough sample was probably taken. The sample size in this study was less than the sample size in this study, so that is why the within study variance is more. Okay, so for A, the within study variance will be more, hence the q statistic will be less for A and q statistic will be more for B. So q statistic will be less for A and q statistic will be more for B. Now I want you to compare A with C. So you can see what is happening between A and C. So between A and C, again you will have a summary effect for C also, right? Let's assume it is here, somewhere here. Now you will calculate the difference between the effect size and the summary effect, and you'll do square of that, and then you will sum them up, and this will be divided by the variance across studies, right? Now what have we done when we moved from A to C? This is a simulated example, of course. The difference between the effect size and the mean, the summary effect, it has been multiplied by 2. This was a simulation, so the numerator was multiplied by 2 and the denominator was also multiplied by the 2, which means that this C was constructed in such a way that the variance between the within study variance, okay, this was multiplied by 2. So you can see the confidence intervals are much wider in C as compared to A. This is because the within study variance has been actually doubled. Similarly, the difference between the effect size and the summary effect has also square, this has also been doubled. So basically you can say that the numerator, which is the observed variation, and the denominator, which is the within study variation, both have been doubled. Now because both the numerators and denominators have been doubled, when you will calculate a Q statistic for the C, it will actually be same as A. So the Q statistic of A and C will be same because the observed variation was also doubled in this simulation and within study variation was also doubled. Similarly, when you will go from B to C, even though it may look like the it may look like D is having more variation, but what we have done is the observed variation, that is the difference between the effect size and the summary effect square, observed variation has also been doubled when we move from B to D, and the within study variance has also been doubled. So you can see that the confidence intervals are much wider in D as compared to B. This is simply because within study variance has been doubled when we move from B to D, and the observed variation has also been doubled. So because we doubled both the numerator and denominator, when you will compute a Q statistic, you will find out the Q statistic will be same for B and D. So what is the importance of Q statistic is that it is a standardized measure, right? As you can see, it is not changing from A to C or B to D, because this is a ratio of observed variance to the within study variance. So this is the importance of Q statistic, that it will not change if there is an equal increase in the observed variance and the within study variance. Okay, so I'll just read it for you and try to make sense of the concept of Q statistic. The observed effects, you will see they are identical in A and B, right? I have told you all these effect sizes, they were same actually. This was a simulation and all these effect sizes, they were same across A and B, right? The only difference between A and B is that the confidence intervals are much wider for A as compared to B, right? So one thing you can already see, very important, one thing you can already see is, if I were to ask you between A and B, which which forest plot looks more consistent with you can say random effect model, that is heterogeneity, which model looks more consistent with heterogeneity, most of you will say B. It does look like there is some real variation occurring in the true effect size, right? But in A, because there is so much overlap occurring, you can see there is so much overlap between these effect size, it looks like maybe there is no real true variation in the true effect size, maybe most of it is just random error. And if we were to shorten the confidence intervals, we'll see that, right? So which plot looks more consistent with heterogeneity or like greater heterogeneity, that is B, and you can see the Q statistic will be more for B as compared to A. So the Q statistic will indicate that there is more heterogeneity is indicating that there is more heterogeneity in B as compared to A, right? So the visual impression in A is that the studies could actually share a common effect, and the observed dispersion is simply falling within the umbrella of the confidence interval. But by contrast, for B, you will see the confidence intervals are much more narrow, and hence they cannot comfortably account for the observed dispersion. So just by visual inspection, you can see that in case of A, you can say that the reason why we are having this much variation, this could be simply due to random error, because the confidence intervals are so much wide. That is why we are seeing most of the variation may be contributed by random error. It's possible by to say that by visual inspection, but in B it's not possible to say that, because there is the confidence intervals are so narrow, most of the variation cannot be accounted by random error. You'll have to say that it does look like probably there is some variation occurring in the true effect size. So it does look like B is having more heterogeneity than A, right, which will be indicated by the Q statistic. Similarly, when you see the difference between C and D, the same difference is there. The effect sizes are actually same between C and D. Okay, the effect size of the individual studies, they have been same, they are same between C and D, but the difference is in C the confidence intervals are so wide, and in D they are narrow. So it gives the impression that in case of D there is some real heterogeneity happening. Okay, it does look like there is some real variation in the true effect size, right? So it does look like there is some heterogeneity, but in case of C it almost looks like most of the variation is simply due to random error. Okay, all of this because the confidence intervals are so wide, right? That's why it looks like most of the variation is probably just simply because of random error, right? So because C has wider confidence interval, in case of C the effects can be explained by within study error, but in case of D they cannot be explained simply because of within study error. In D you will have to say that there is probably some variation in the true effect size, right? So the difference between A, B and C and D is that we have changed the absolute value or the scale of dispersion. And so what to move from A to C, now I've told you what happened when we moved from A to C. When we moved from A to C, we multiplied both the observed variation as well as the within study variation by 2. Okay, so both the within study variation, observed variation multiplied by 2. So the scale has increased, but the ratio will still remain unchanged. Similarly, for B and D, the same thing happened, that the observed variation and the within study variation was multiplied by 2 in this simulation. So you can see that the ratio of observed to expected variation will be same across between B and D. Okay, so basically this is Q statistic. So the one reflected in the difference between A and B and C and D that we want to capture for the purpose of isolating true variation. In other words, we need a statistic that is sensitive to the ratio of the observed variation to the within study error rather than absolute values. The statistic that we use for this purpose is Q. So it is great that because Q is a ratio, it will be same between A and C. Because Q is a ratio, it is only sensitive to the ratio of the observed variation and the expected variation, that is your random observed variation and the within study error, right? So it will be same between A and C. Even though the scales have changed, you can see that the scales are changing, right? The dispersion is on a much larger scale in C as compared to A. Still the Q statistic will be same, because the Q statistic is a ratio and it is only sensitive to the ratio of the observed variation with within study variation, right? Whereas between A and B, you can see that the Q statistic will be much more for B as compared to A. Why it will be much more? Because the within study variance is less across B. You can see the confidence intervals are narrow, so the within study variance is less across in B, and the within study variance is more in A. So for this reason the Q statistic will be less in A and it will be more in B, indicating in case of B that there is more potential for there is more heterogeneity in B as compared to A. Similarly, when you compare between C and D, even though the effect sizes themselves are same, but you can see that the within study variance is more in C as compared to D. So Q statistic will be less in C and it will be more in D. So more Q statistic in D will be indicating that there is probably more heterogeneity in D, and whatever variation is there in the effect size, that is a true variation that cannot be explained simply by the random error. Okay, So same thing I've written in this diagram. The confidence intervals are wide in case of A. So most of the variation can be explained by within study variance, right? And tau square can even be 0, means the between study variance can even be 0. It is possible that this is consistent with a fixed effect model. It is possible to explain this like this. But in case of B, you can see that there is so much like the confidence intervals are so narrow that all this variation cannot be simply explained by random error, or it cannot be simply explained by within study variance. You can't say in this case, probably by visual inspection at least, that tau square can be 0, because it does look like there is some between study variance happening here. So in this case, in case of A and C, you can say that true effects can be same. It is possible to say that by visual inspection. But in case of B and D, we cannot say that the true effects can be same, because there is confidence intervals are not so narrow in case of B and D. So the variation we cannot be simply explained by random error, and you will have to say that there is probably some sort of variation occurring in true effects. Okay, so that is the concept of Q statistic. So basically this is the formula for Q statistic. Remember, this is the ratio of the observed variation with the within study variation, right? So this is the observed variation, which is the difference in effect size and summary effect square multiplied by the weight of the study. And because you may not want to calculate the summary effect right away, you can also use this formula. So it will be summation of the weight into effect size square and summation of weight effect size to the whole square divided by summation of weights of the studies. And we have already used this formula previously in random effect modeling examples where we calculated the t-square, the t-square statistic for calculating the weights of random effect modeling. So what is this Q? Basically this is observed weighted sum of squares, right? Now here is a question. I told you that we need to separate the true variation out of the total observed variation. This Q is actually the observed weighted sum of squares. Okay, it is what we are seeing in our study. So this Q is what we are seeing, what we are observing. Now if you want to isolate the component of heterogeneity from this Q, you will also have to calculate like expected Q, like expected weighted sum of square. How much Q do you expect if there was only random error? How much Q would you expect if the true effects were consistent across all the studies, which means there was no heterogeneity? So the answer to that question is the Q actually follows a chi-square distribution, and the expected weight sum of squares, when you are expecting the true effects to be similar across all the studies, it will be degree simply equal to degree of freedom, which will be number of studies minus 1. So this is nothing but the expected value of Q if there was only random error and there was no heterogeneity. So now you know how to isolate the true variance out of this Q. True variance will be the observed weighted sum of squares minus the expected weighted sum of squares. So the observed weighted sum of square is Q and expected is your degree of freedom. So this is the true dispersion. Basically this is the true variance. Okay, and this true variance will use for computing the p-value also, which will be used for basically doing test of heterogeneity. Okay, so I'll repeat again, this Q is the observed weighted sum of squares, right? This is what we are actually seeing. Okay, this is the ratio of the observed variance to the within study variance, and this ratio is the ratio that we are seeing. This is the weighted sum of square which we are seeing in our meta-analysis. But then we have to compute what is the expected Q, or what is the expected weighted sum of square when there was only random error, means there was no heterogeneity. That will be equal to degree of freedom, because Q follows a chi-square distribution. And so you will subtract this degree of freedom from the computed value of Q to get your true variance. So true variance will be Q minus degrees of freedom. So now you can see what were the steps in computing Q. Already we have talked about that it is the weighted difference between the effect size and the summary effect. So it is called weighted sum of squares, right? And what is the weight? It is the inverse of the within study variance, right? Y is the study effect size and M is the summary effect, and of course K is the number of studies. So in words, we compute the deviation of each effect size from the mean. Basically, we compute how much difference is there from the mean of each effect size. We do the square of it and we weight this by the inverse variance and we sum these values, right? So it is called weighted sum of squares. You can also write it like this. We have talked about this because we know that the weight is the inverse of the variance, and variance is nothing but the within study standard deviation square. So you can also write it like this. Now you can see it is a standardized measure, right? What does it mean? It means it is not affected by the metric of the effect size index. This is very, very important. So like, because it is standardized and it is not affected by the effect size index, you can compare it between two studies of different effect size index also. Okay, so it is similar to the standardized mean difference. Because it is been standardized, it has been divided by the standard deviation एक तरीके से, so you can compare it between studies of different effect size index also. And of course, it is not possible always to first calculate the summary effect and then to calculate like this. So you can use this equivalent formula also. This will be the summation of weight into weight effect size square minus summation of weight and effect size to the whole square and divided by summation of the weights of the study. And what is the expected value? We know that we are going to assume that all the studies, they have a common effect size. Basically, we'll assume somewhat like a fixed effect model, basically, that all the studies, they have a common effect size, and whatever variation is there, it is simply due to sampling error. So now you will ask yourself, how much Q would I expect? How much weighted sum of square I expect if the studies were having a common effect size? So the answer to that would be simply the degrees of freedom, and that will be number of studies minus 1. So the excess variation, you know, the Q is the observed weighted sum of square and DF is the expected sum of square. So the excess, the difference will be nothing but the excess variation of the hetero, what you can use to quantify the heterogeneity, right? Now, so now whatever 4 forest plots I showed you earlier, now I am going to show you the actual Q and the DF of all those plots. So if you remember, I told you that in A and B, you can see in A and B, we have changed the absolute value of the dispersion. That is, you can see the within study variance was more in A and less in B, right? But obviously the observed variation, right, that is the ratio, it will change. Okay, so Q will be actually less for this because there is more within study variation, and B, the Q statistic will be more because there is less within study variation. So the ratio will change, right? So you can see when we compute the Q for study A, it will come to be 3, and for B it will come to be 12. This is because the within study variance is less, the dispersion is actually less. We have changed the dispersion, the absolute value of the dispersion has been changed, right? So the denominator has changed, so Q will increase for B. And what will be the expected value of Q? That will be the degrees of freedom, and it will be 5 for both of them, A and B. Why? Because you know there are 6 studies, right? So degree of freedom will be 5 for both A and B. So now you can see that in A, the observed variation, the observed dispersion Q is 3 and expected is 5. So observed is less than expected, right? You can see Q minus DF will be less than 0, right? 3 minus 5 will be what? Minus 2, less than 0. So basically the concept is that the observed dispersion, that is 3, it is less than the expected dispersion. What we would have expected if there was only random error. Basically it means that whatever dispersion you are seeing, this is just because of random error, right? It makes sense. We were expecting at least 5 amount of dispersion was possible if there was only random error. If there was no variability in the true effect size and only random error was there, then 5 the expected weighted sum of square could have been 5, and we are seeing only 3. it means that whatever dispersion is there, it could be accounted by simply random error, right? So in A, the conclusion would be that whatever dispersion is there, it can be accounted by the random error, right? But in B, you can see that the value of Q is 12, which is the observed dispersion. So the observed dispersion is 12, but the expected dispersion is 5, right? So if there was only random error, only and only random error was there, then you would have expected the weighted sum of square to be 5. But what you are actually observing is 12. It means something excess is there. It means apart from random variation, there is some true variation also occurring in the effect size, right? So which means the difference of that will be 7, right? And because 7 is more than 0, this difference is more than 0, you can see you can say that Q is more than DF, that is the observed amount of dispersion is more than the expected amount of dispersion. You cannot, all this dispersion cannot be accounted for simply by the random error. Means some of the dispersion is also due to the true variation in the effect size. Okay, so I hope this concept is making sense. Similarly, for C and D, let's compare between C and D. Same thing, you will see that the Q will be 3 here. Remember, the Q will be same for A and C. Why? Because what we have done when we moved from A to C is that we multiplied both the numerator as well as the denominator. So the observed amount of dispersion and the within study variance. So within study variance has been doubled. You can see the confidence intervals are much wider for C as compared to A. So within study variance has also been doubled, and observed amount of dispersion has also been doubled. So that would be like the difference between the effect size and the mean effect square, right? So the observed dispersion has also been doubled, and within study variance has also been doubled. So because of which the Q will remain same. So again, Q is 3 here, and expected Q was 5. So you can say that observed amount of dispersion is less than the expected, which means that whatever dispersion is there, it can be accounted for simply by random error. But in case of D, you will see Q is 12 and DF, you know, it is 5. So you can see that the observed amount of dispersion is more than the expected amount of dispersion if there was only random error. Means that all this dispersion cannot be explained simply by the random error. There is probably some variation in the true effect size also occurring here, right? However, the problem with this Q statistic is that Q is not an intuitive measure, right? Of course, you can understand the concept of whether this Q is basically the total dispersion, the total weighted sum of square, and DF, degrees of freedom, is the expected dispersion. And whatever excess is there, that is excess dispersion. If there is expected excess dispersion, excess variation is there, then you will say that okay, there is probably some heterogeneity occurring. But the problem is it is not an intuitive measure. The most important reason why it is not intuitive is the scale is not the same as the original scale, like the scale of the original metric, the original effect size index, right? So for this reason, it is not an intuitive measure. First of all, it is a sum, it's not an average or a mean, right? And also remember, it depends on the number of studies also. This is an important property. We'll come to the properties of statistic in one later on lecture. But remember, this Q is very sensitive to number of studies, okay? And it is a standardized, it is on standardized scale. So we will eventually I will tell you about T and T square. These are the statistics which are expressed in the same scale as the original metric, right? So this is the property that the Q statistic does not have, right? So it is not an intuitive measure for that reason. But now, because we know that Q is a standardized metric, and we also know that Q is sensitive to the number of studies. These are the two properties, very important properties it is having. First, it is on standardized scale, right? Second is that it is dependent on the number of studies. So because of these two properties, we can use it to compute the p-value, or basically we can use it to we usually use Q to perform the test of heterogeneity. It is a good you can say statistic for which we do the test of heterogeneity, right? So to estimate the variance So if you want to convert the q into original metric, then you can use t square and t. That will be the discussion, the topic of discussion for the next video. Then of course you can also convert it into I square. I square is very unique kind of statistic, in the sense it is neither dependent upon the number of studies and nor it is on standardized scale. It is simply a proportion. So this will not have the this will not depend on the number of studies. Okay, so this is the concept that you need to remember. Basically you will calculate the q, you remember the formula for q, and we'll see the worked examples later on. It will be some product of wy square divided by sum of the weights of the study, right? And then you will calculate the degrees of freedom, which will be k minus 1, and then you will compare the q with df. If observed is less than expected, means obviously there is no heterogeneity, right? And when you will apply the p value, when you will do the test of heterogeneity, you will find out the p value will be more than 0.05. So that will basically indicate that there is no heterogeneity, right? So the basically your null hypothesis could not be rejected, and you will say there is probably no it is consistent with having no heterogeneity. There is not enough evidence to say that there is heterogeneity. And if the q is more than df, which means the observed variation is more than the expected variation, it means there is probably some excess variation is there because of true variation in the effect size, means there is heterogeneity, and in that case the p value of your test, the heterogeneity test, it will be significant. So when the p value is significant, you will say the null hypothesis is rejected, and the null hypothesis is that there is no heterogeneity. So null hypothesis will be rejected, and you will accept that you will say that yes, there is heterogeneity. So what you just need to remember is the p value is significant, that indicates the heterogeneity in a test for homogeneity or heterogeneity, you can say. Okay, so what is the null hypothesis for this test? The null hypothesis is that there is no heterogeneity, basically that all the studies, they share a common effect size, basically, right? So the null hypothesis is of no heterogeneity, right? So under the null hypothesis, you know that if there is no heterogeneity, you would expect that the value of q will be same as the degree of freedom, right? I told you the value of, if there is no heterogeneity, how much do you expect the q or weighted sum of square to be? You expect it to be equal to the degrees of freedom, right? Because why? Because q actually follows a central chi-square distribution with a degree of freedom equal to k minus 1. So because of this reason, if the null hypothesis is true, means that there is no heterogeneity, and whatever variation is there, it is simply due to random error, then you would expect the value of q to be equal to k minus 1, right? Then you will compute a p value to see how much difference is there between what the observed value of q is and what was the expected value of q, in this case k minus 1. If the difference is too much, then the p value will come as, if the difference is so significant, p value will come as less than 0.05 or whatever your threshold is. In most of the cases, we set the threshold at either 0.1 or 0.05. okay, sometimes we set the alpha at 0.1 also, because this test is believed to be a very low power test, right? And because of this reason, the threshold can be taken a little bit higher also. Okay, so p value basically less than alpha, it asks us to reject the null hypothesis. What was the null hypothesis? That there is no heterogeneity. So if the p value is significant, we will conclude that there is some heterogeneity, right? And so if the alpha is if the p is less than alpha, we will reject the null, and we will conclude that the studies do not share a common effect size, right? So remember, just like all the test of significance, this test is sensitive to two things. First is, of course, how much dispersion is there, right? If there is really, like, the q and df are very different from each other, there is a lot of difference between q and df, then p value will be significant. And if there is less difference between q and df, the p value will be less significant, right? Or the p value will be higher, basically. So that is one thing that it depends on. It depends on the effect size itself, like the excess dispersion. But one more thing, the p value depends here, just like for all the tests of significance, is the precision of the study. That is the sample here, in this case it will be number of studies, not the sample size. It will be the number of of studies. So what this means is basically what I'm trying to say is that simply you can make a non-significant p-value into a significant p-value just by simply having more sample size in a study, right? That we know. That is the simple concept in a test, any test of significance. Either you actually increase the difference between the groups, that is effect size itself, or you simply increase the sample size. Similarly here also, the p-value is sensitive not only to excess dispersion but also to the number of studies. So if you increase the number of studies, the p-value could be made significant, right? So this is why this is not a this test is only good enough so as to tell you whether there is heterogeneity or not, but how much heterogeneity is there, you cannot rely upon a p-value. Okay, same for any other p-value. You cannot rely on a p-value to tell you how much difference is there. For that you will have to look at the effect size itself. Similarly here, the p-value will not be able to tell you how much dispersion is there, because it is not only sensitive to the amount of dispersion, it is also sensitive to the number of studies, right? So I'll show you how this appears. So basically there are two things the p-value is sensitive to. It is sensitive to dispersion, but it is also sensitive to precision of the number of studies. So you can see in this diagram, this is A and this is B. Now, would you be able to tell me in which case the the dispersion is more? What is dispersion? Dispersion means the difference between your observed dispersion and your expected dispersion, which is the DF, right? So you can see the difference is small in case of A, but the difference is big. The dispersion is more in case of B. So because the dispersion is more in case of B, you would expect the p-value to be more significant or less than. So because you can see that there is more dispersion in case of B as compared to A, you would expect that the p-value will be more significant or it will be less as compared to A. So it is moving more towards 0 basically, right? Now let's compare between C and D. You can see for C the dispersion is less and for D the dispersion is more, right? There is more dispersion for D as compared to C. So because the dispersion is increasing, you would expect that the p-value will become more significant or it will be moving closer to 0, right? So this is the impact of dispersion. From A to B, as we move, you see that the dispersion is increasing, right? So the p-value will be moving closer to 0. The dispersion like Q minus DF is also increasing. The amount of dispersion is also increasing. If you will see, we will come to T square later on, but right now you can see T square indicates the amount of dispersion. So you can see that the T square is also increasing from A to B and it is also increasing from C to D. So basically as the amount of dispersion increases, you would expect that the p-value becomes more significant or the p-value becomes closer to 0, right? Second thing it is very sensitive to is the number of studies. Now this is very important. Look at this. You will be able to see as we move from A to C and B to D what happens. So see, in case of A, the dispersion is there. Of course, this dispersion, amount of dispersion is in both the cases it is equal only, right? See, for A you will see, can you see the amount of dispersion is Q minus DF, it is less than 0. And here also it is less than 0. And similarly this is T square. T square is same for A and C. So what is the difference between A and C? It is the number of studies. In case of A you have 6 studies, but in case of C I think you have 12 studies. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12. So because there are more number of studies, right, what happens, even though the dispersion is same for A and C, the number of studies has increased. Because the number of studies has increased, the p-value becomes less significant. This is very important to understand. I'll show you. See, p-value is sensitive to number of studies of precision. How it is sensitive? If the dispersion is less than 0, if the difference between Q and DF is less than 0, means the observed dispersion is less than the expected dispersion. In that case, what happens is, as we gather more information, because when we have 12 studies instead of 6 studies, we are gathering more information. So as you gather more information, the p-value, it will show non-significance, right? P-value will become closer to 1, because as we gather more information, it becomes clear that there is no heterogeneity indeed, right? you can see there is no heterogeneity, right? When q minus df is less than 0 means most of the dispersion can be accounted by the random error, right? So this is true for both A and C. As we move from A to C, we gather more information and hence p value becomes even less significant. But what happens from B to D? You will see in case of B and D both, q minus df is more than 0. So there is some real dispersion occurring, there is some excess dispersion occurring here, in the sense that the observed dispersion is more than the expected dispersion. Expected dispersion was 6 in this case, and expected dispersion will be 5, sorry, k minus 1, and here it will be 11, right? So you can see that observed dispersion here is more than expected dispersion in case of B also, and in case of C also, right? So the dispersion is it is more than 0 for B and C, right? So what happens when you move from B to C? As you move from B to C, you can see you are gathering more information again, right? So when you move from B to C and you know that the observed dispersion is more than the expected dispersion, actually the amount of dispersion is same for B and D, it is 0.037. So if you gather more information, the p value will become more significant, indicating that indeed there is heterogeneity. Okay, so this is important to understand. If q minus df is less than 0, means that observed dispersion is less than the expected dispersion, then as you gather more information, p value will become non-significant, indicating there is no heterogeneity, right? Whereas it will become, basically it will go closer to 1. And if the observed minus expected dispersion is more than 0, means that there is observed dispersion is more than the expected dispersion, means you are expecting heterogeneity. In that case, when you accumulate more data by gathering more number of studies, then the p value will become closer to 0, indicating that there is heterogeneity, right? Whereas when the dispersion increases, if the dispersion increases, p value will become obviously more significant, indicating that there is heterogeneity. So this is how p value is sensitive to dispersion as well as number of studies. So basically now what you need to remember is that the null hypothesis for test for heterogeneity is that the all studies have a common effect size, and what this basically means is that q will basically follow chi-square distribution with degree of freedom equal to k minus 1. So the value of q will be equal to df, right? In case of null hypothesis, that is your null hypothesis, that there is no true variation, all the studies have a common effect, there is only random variation, and if there is random variation, then the observed value of q will be exactly equal to the expected value, which will be equal to degrees of freedom, that is k minus 1. And second thing you need to remember is the p value which you calculate for the test of heterogeneity is very sensitive to degree of dispersion, but it is also sensitive to the number of studies. So if the q is less than df, then adding more studies will cause the p value to move towards 1, right? And if q is more than df, if q minus df is more than 0, then adding more studies, like increasing the number of studies, it will move the p value towards 0. So now I just want to quickly discuss some problem with this p value and this test. Rather, we know that we have discussed this, that the test for heterogeneity has very low power. What this means is that it's not always true that even if there is heterogeneity, p value will come as significant, right? So what does it mean if the p value is significant, if it is non-significant? We have seen that p value is sensitive not only to the dispersion but also to the number of studies. So this is the problem. Why? Because significant p value means there could be two possibilities. Either the p value came significant because there is really large heterogeneity, there was a large amount of dispersion, because of which p value came significant. But it is also possible for p value to come significant in a test of heterogeneity if there was small dispersion, small heterogeneity was there, but the number of studies was large, right? So this is a problem which you see across most of the tests, all the tests of significance, right? That p values could be significant either because the effect size is large or because the sample size is large. Similarly here also the p value could be significant if there is large heterogeneity or if there is small heterogeneity with large number of studies. Similarly, if there is non-significant p-value, it could be either because in reality there is small heterogeneity, which would be good, right? That p-value is non-significant because there is small heterogeneity. But it is also possible for a p-value to come non-significant if there is large heterogeneity, but it is combined with a small or less number of studies, right? So p-value could be non-significant if there is small heterogeneity, or it could be non-significant if there is large heterogeneity but the number of studies is less. Okay. Also remember one thing, the test of heterogeneity is only designed to tell you if there is sufficient evidence to reject the null hypothesis and conclude there is heterogeneity or not. But if a p-value is non-significant, does it mean there is no heterogeneity? No, we can never accept null hypothesis. Just like for any other test of significance, you will never accept the null hypothesis. You can never say there is no heterogeneity, right? So if the p-value is significant, I can say either there is large heterogeneity or there is small heterogeneity with large number of studies, right? If the p-value is non-significant, I cannot say there is no heterogeneity. I can never say that if xi's are consistent. I can only say that there is not enough evidence to conclude heterogeneity, right? There was not enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis, right? And we could not reject the null hypothesis. So there is not enough evidence to conclude heterogeneity. And remember, p-value could be non-significant in two cases. One could be there is actually in reality, yes, there is indeed small heterogeneity, or it could be non-significant if there is large heterogeneity, means t square is large, but it is combined with a study which with less number of studies, right? Another problem is sometimes we take studies which have very large within study variance. So if there is large within study variance, and even if the t square is large, even if the between study variance is large but the within study variance is even larger, that is also another reason why p-value could be non-significant. So p-value could be non-significant for two reasons. One is the number of studies is less, or the within study variance is too large. Both of these things will cause this test to have low power. So the test will have low power in two cases, when the number of studies is less or when the within study variance is very high. In both of the cases, the power of the test will be low and p-value may come as non-significant even if there is significant or large heterogeneity. So you understand why the within study variance would be large. It will be large when the studies are small, right? It will be large when the studies are small sample size. Okay, so I'll mention this in the notes that I'll share. So two reasons why why this test could have a low power. One reason could be that the number of studies is less, or another reason could be the sample size of the study is less, which will cause the study to have very large within study variance. So due to these two reasons, the test could have low power with small number of studies or small sample size of the study. When the sample size of the study is less, right, when the sample size of the study is less, the within study variance will be high. So even if there is large dispersion or large heterogeneity, between study variance is too high, still in that case it is possible the p-value may come as non-significant, right? Also another point is that, remember, the Q statistic and p-value, they only address the test of significance. That is, they may help you decide whether there is enough evidence of heterogeneity or not. But these statistic and Q statistic and p-value cannot be surrogate for calculating the total amount of true variance. For that we need the t-square statistic. Okay, so to calculate the amount of heterogeneity, you cannot use the Q statistic. It will only tell you whether there is heterogeneity or not, no heterogeneity, whether there is enough evidence of heterogeneity or not. It can never tell you how much heterogeneity is there. For that you need to use t square, right? The reason I have already told you, because a significant and non-significant p-value is because p-values are not only sensitive to amount of heterogeneity, they are also sensitive to the precision. They are also sensitive to number of study and the sample size of the study. Because of this reason, p-value will not reflect the amount of dispersion, right? So this is not a good measure to see the amount of heterogeneity. It is only good enough to tell you whether there is evidence of heterogeneity or not, right? Please remember this line. This is very important. The very important purpose of this Q statistic is only to tell you the viability of the null hypothesis, whether there is enough evidence to say there is heterogeneity or not. So the purpose served by the test is to assess the viability of null hypothesis and never ever to estimate the magnitude of true dispersion. You cannot use Q statistic or p value to say how much heterogeneity is there. You cannot decide the amount of heterogeneity by looking at the p values of the Q for the Q statistic, right? So to tell you how much heterogeneity is there, we will describe a t square statistic in the next video.